People are always trying to get attention. That's why social media exists. That's why, especially as business owners, entrepreneurs, we're always trying to capture attention on social media. And that attention is fleeting. Those are really hard places to compete. Whereas podcasting, it really is an independent media source, and the best ideas usually win out.
Hey, welcome back to Exploring Growth. This was a really fun episode with Dana, and we got off on a big tangent kind of right out of the gate, talking about AI and human connection and all this sort of, complex stuff with that has to do with like the nucleus of what we're talking about with podcasting. So if you want to skip, if you're here to learn about guesting and what that looks like for you, and you want to skip past all that, then just go straight to around the 16-minute mark. And that's where we start talking about the pros and cons of guesting on podcast. And then at the end, Dana has a free resource that we're going to link below, but he'll give you the address for if you've listened to this, you can go there and check that out as well. So enjoy this episode. As many of you know, I run a podcast agency where we help our clients launch and run podcasts that create new business opportunities and increase brand authority in their space. But there's another side to podcasting, and that's podcast guesting. A big reason I'm able to have so many amazing guests on my show is due to the work that podcast booking agents do and publicists. And that includes my guest today, Dana Lindahl, founder and CEO at legendarypodcast.com. I'm super excited about jumping into this conversation around the value of being a guest on other podcasts. So welcome to the show, Dana.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to go over everything today.
Yeah. So, just give a quick overview of what you guys do, and then we'll jump into our conversation.
So we are a podcast guesting agency. So we work primarily with founders, entrepreneurs, sometimes executive teams to help them to go on podcast tours, so to speak. If you've never worked with a guest agency before, a podcast booking agency, I would say we're closest to a PR agency that focuses specifically on podcasts. So a traditional PR agency would go out and be finding radio spots for you and television spots, appearing on talk shows and things like that. Whereas we focus on podcasts specifically. Some PR agencies these days do focus on podcasting as well, although they would be focused more on the, kind of household name podcast that, people who are not podcast enthusiasts or listening to business podcasts specifically might know about. So, Joe Rogan, things like that.
Yeah. I love the idea of framing it as a tour because, it allows you to sort of maybe kind of have a start and end point to experiment with different things that you want to put out there. I think of it from a podcast creation standpoint as running series, that people can listen to different things simultaneously. But as a guest, I think that's a cool framework to think okay, what do I have to say to the world, and what value am I trying to get back? And I'm going to go tour, these types of podcasts with these kind of audiences, and then kind of, okay, let's take a step back and look at what we did. Now let's move on to the next tour, maybe 2.0.
Yeah. And I think a lot of podcasts will operate in terms of seasons. I think a lot of podcast tours do the same thing as well, or they should at least. So people will go and they'll be talking about similar sorts of topics, and then their industry will evolve. They will evolve as a person. They'll evolve as a business owner. And all of a sudden they're going to want to talk about something a little bit different. So I like to view it as a tour as well, because tours, have a specific start and stop point. And it doesn't mean they need to stop entirely, but the direction can shift or change a little bit.
Yeah. I heard this term recently about podcasts being sort of micro audiences, right? So if you're a guest, you're putting your brand and your voice and your domain authority and everything else in front of all of these sort of micro audiences. I thought that was a really interesting way to frame it. And it's true. I mean, the people who listen to my show are going to be a little bit different than the next growth-oriented show or entrepreneurial show. So being on my show and then being on that show is you're sort of stacking these micro audiences on top of each other. And I think there's a ton of value in the micro influencer or the micro, cosms of the marketing space.
Yeah, and what's interesting is sometimes people will hear about what sort of listenership a podcast will have before they decide to go on it, and
Yeah.
they hear that the listenership might be in the hundreds and be fairly underwhelmed
Hmm.
by that because they're used to seeing YouTube videos that they watch and things like that having thousands or even millions of views.
Hmm.
And the difference is one, you're speaking directly to your audience. So those same people would be overjoyed to be in a room at a conference speaking to even just a room of 50 or
Yes.
100 people. And the other big difference is the podcast has usually developed their own audience who follows what they say. And you're being platformed by that host, someone who, maybe agrees with your message or they just want to dig in more and find out more about what you have to say. But the audience definitely is receptive to the types of things that they're platforming.
Yeah.
So even if a show only has 100 200 listeners, those are still 200 people that are intent on listening to that episode because they want to learn more from the people that the host is platforming on the show.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, you're speaking straight to my heart because that's the show that I want to run, and that's the audience that I want to curate. Is, I mean, to the degree that I can, I want to know every single person that is following the show, right? And I do that through my newsletter, But I want engagement to be really high with my audience. So naturally, it's going to be typically a smaller audience. But to your point, that's the best way to think of it. Is if you could stand on a stage in front of 100 of the right people versus 1,000 of, I don't know, there might be 50 people in here that are the right people. Then yeah, there's more people, but there's only 50, right? But if you had 100 people that are all glued to what you're saying, they're there to hear that thing, that's highly valuable.
And we always recommend for people to be doing a little bit of a mix of both. So going on some, maybe higher traffic shows that are a bit more generalist in nature, as well as going on some smaller shows that are very specific in the things they talk about. Now, of course, everybody wants to go on the show that's specific in what they talk about and also has a huge listenership. But
yes,
those also have, a lot of people trying to go on them, and there's a lot of demand. And another thing that's interesting is sometimes we'll work with people and we'll get them placed, and the recording will take place for 3 or 4 months. Yeah, sometimes. And people are often disappointed to find out, like, I signed up for the service and this recording is not going to happen for 4 months. And the interesting thing is, that's obviously a very in-demand show. If they have a list 4 months out of people that they're recording with, that means people want to be on that show.
That's right.
People are listening to that show as
well. That's right. Yeah, and that's the one you want, even though it takes a little while. There's not a lot of those out there. I mean, I have seen a lot and do this every day. And it's hard to find. I mean, I get feedback from all the people that come on my podcast, and they tell me, not even sometimes when I'm asking, and they'll say, a lot of the podcasts I go on are just sort of surface level. They're checking a box. It's not, super deep. So to find those is the goal. And it's important to try to find as many of those as possible, whether it's, again, general or specific, because your message can appeal to both.
Yeah. I mean, just like the what is the old adage? There's something for everybody, right?
Yeah.
And there's so many podcasts out there these days. There's so many podcasts on even niche topics, but someone out there is listening to it. Someone is subscribed to these things. And it's incredible to me that, people can keep putting out content that's, there's a very similar number of shows to any given show out there, and they all have their own audiences, and their own audiences are all inherently unique.
Agreed. And I think that the future is going to be even more and more nuanced. I just did an episode with someone. We talked about a lot about AI and integration of humans and AI through tech, and I think that the future is human sort of augmented by AI, right? And the more that we automate and put AI in charge of the things that we really don't want to do, then it opens our world up to the more human connection and more, exploration of humankind. I think that's a really good positive path forward, and podcasting helps us do that.
I'm sure you've heard some of the Notebook LM podcasts that are.
I don't think so.
You haven't seen these before?
I don't think so.
So the first time I was exposed to it was when someone leaked out the Mr. Beast PDF of his rules of being in as a part of the organization, right? He was fairly controversial several
Okay.
months ago about being somewhat, strict on how the employees did things.
Yeah.
So that was the first time that I had ever seen it used. And you can just get access to Google product, but they created a full long form podcast off of that document, and it was two AIs talking back and forth. And if someone hadn't told me, I might have been convinced that there's two people I'd never heard of before. Now, I've heard it enough times to kind of be able to pick some of these things out and recognize the voices. And people are talking about, this is going to be the death of the independent podcaster. And I don't believe that's true for one big reason, actually, is, there's obviously the points about, people are going to want to have authentic opinions and things like that. And I will say, like, the AI did a very good job at, saying things that weren't in the document directly, like forming its own opinions of things that were in the document. But the big thing is, this was based off of a 30, 40 page document or so to create a 15-minute podcast conversation that sounded fairly convincing.
Yeah.
But it's so much easier to create a 15-minute podcast conversation than it is to create a 40-page document to use as the source material.
Exactly. Yeah. You're hitting the nail on the head. That's exactly how I think of AI, is that there is a lot of advantage to it. It generatively can create on its own, based on data that it has, but at some point it's eating its own self. So at some point you need new data. And so that's where humans come in, right? Humans are the new data points. And I think by going on podcasts, by hosting podcasts, and TV shows, radio shows, all the LinkedIn, whatever it may be, creating more content that comes from my brain and my heart, that's going to drive, more impact from the generative AI down the cascade.
Yeah, not to go too far off on a tangent here, but what gives me kind of a food for thought, I guess, is I use Google a lot less these days compared to using ChatGPT. I love Perplexity, especially when it comes to answering questions and things like that. And when I go and ask it a question, it goes out there and it searches the internet for people who have been discussing these sorts of things before, and finding the same sort of things that I would find on Google. But I have to wonder, is the more people start using these sorts of tools to answer their own questions, will there be less people asking these questions and thus providing the answers to them on places online, such as Reddit and community discussion forums, to actually allow us to be searching and coming up with the answers through these AI tools? Like, it's working very well right now because there's still enough people who are asking the questions and answering the questions. But as that becomes more and more reliant on, well, I'm just going to ask the AI. Are there still going to be people providing the source material for it to be based off of?
I think, for as far as I can see, those tools just have to change. So Google has to change, Reddit has to change, and they have to rest on their inherent value for what they are. So Reddit has to have its inherent value. Google has to have an inherent value. And I think for search, if ChatGPT is just going to Google or Bing and finding the answer and parsing an answer for you, solution, you still need new data and new content on the front end for them to go find. Now, there's some generative action that's happening there, but as the world evolves and news evolves and people evolve, you need that new content. So that's where Google may change to be receiving of that content, or maybe it deflates and the reception of the content goes straight to GPT or some other version. But I think that, just like in business, if a business is floating along with a lot of fluff, and padding, then at some point, people come along and say, well, we don't need all of this and we don't need all of this. So what is your business really about? What's the value and what's it worth? I think the same things happen. And that's why I love the free market, because the market decides, right? And in this case, AI is driven by the market. And you and I are both using, ChatGPT more often because we can talk with it versus, I just had that conversation with my a friend the other day. I said, I don't even go to Google very much unless it's a very specific thing, because ChatGPT, it's like, just open a new chat and tell it what I'm trying to do. And we go back and forth for a few minutes and I get my full answer. So no, this is such a tangent, but really not, because it wraps in nicely to this idea of why should you go on other podcasts? So, the world can stay human, that people can still they still want the value from, like, why is someone watching this right now? Right. because they want to hear what I have to say. They want to hear what you have to say. There's some value there that can't be replaced by an AI tool.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think there's still always going to be people that prefer to, hear it in the long form and not just have it summarized. Mm-hmm. Like, what is this meme that I just turned this, short list of bullet points into a professionally written email to sound like I wrote it. And on the other side, there was like someone who says, I just turned this list of this professionally written long email into a list of bullet points so I can pretend like I read it.
Yeah. Now, I think the human side gets more rich, while the AI side, it gets supportive to that richness. So, I think human connection is going to always be there. Look at COVID. COVID demonstrated that, right? We're like, oh, well, are we going to stop shaking hands forever? Like, no, people shake hands. This is what we do in our culture. Maybe sometimes we fist bump, but like most people are not going to stay with the elbow bump. They're going to go back to the shaking the hand. So we're wired a certain way. Tech is not going to change that inherently.
What just popped into my mind as you said that is I've never thought about this before, but I'm really glad this AI revolution didn't actually coincide with, COVID and the lockdowns at the exact same time.
Yes.
Because look at the effect that this had on us, socially as people. Like the world has changed quite a bit since that happened. And a lot of the world has adjusted to, being isolated away from people for a period of time. Right. Learning in person and schools have changed. But if this whole AI revolution happened at that same time, I feel like that would have really changed things for us as the world nuts. For the worse.
I can't imagine. Yeah, I can't imagine sitting at home. Most people are sitting at home with either out of work or staying home from work, going crazy. And then all of a sudden, here's ChatGPT. It's like, wow, that'd have been crazy. Good observation.
Yeah.
Glad that didn't happen. But back to our main point of conversation, which I love this tangent because it's really something that's super important, and one I probably should talk more about. But it goes to the core of what we're talking about: human interaction and authenticity. Let's talk about more practically the pros and cons of guesting, because I know a lot of people came here to listen about. Well, okay, I'm thinking about being on podcast, and is there some value there? Let's talk about the pros and cons of being on podcasts, and I'll let you lead.
Yeah, so there's a ton of pros. I don't think that there's a lot of cons. I'll start off to say that I think that the only cons that there are to going on podcasts only relate to being a con in comparison to it being your own podcast.
Right.
So I guess the other con that you can mention is the time that it takes, but it really doesn't take that much time. For example, we're going to sit here and we're going to talk for an hour or so. And then, as a guest, you and your team are going to do the rest of the work for me. Right. And I say that, gratefully and graciously, but that's the whole, deal, right? Yeah. Is that you've invited me on your show. You're going to produce the show. So outside of the hour or so that it takes to record the episode, maybe a little bit more time to prepare, I don't think that there's a lot in terms of cons for doing it.
Agreed.
The pros are numerous. One is, pretty obvious. You get out there in front of new audiences and people get to hear you and your ideas in long form. So, the world is, people are always trying to get attention. That's why social media exists. That's why, especially as business owners, entrepreneurs, we're always trying to capture attention on social media, and that attention is fleeting. If you're competing with other people who are posting content, whether that be on LinkedIn, Instagram, or whatever your social media platform of choice is, those are really hard places to compete because there's always somebody out there with a larger budget or, can create. They're much better at creating flashy videos or things like that. Whereas podcasting, it really is an independent media source, and the best ideas usually win out. Now, there's still definitely going to be algorithms that come into play, and there's going to be podcasts with bigger budgets that do rise in the charts and things like that. But if someone is listening to the show, you're spending 30, 45 minutes directly in their ears with your message. So that's a pretty obvious one that most people know, but it can't be understated because it's very, very important. There's also a lot of not cons, but pros that I think are less well known. So I don't profess to be an SEO guy, but the backlinks that you get from guesting on podcasts can be great for SEO. Generally, most shows will link back to your site or any other resource that you might have. And that's usually good for link juice.
Yeah, of course.
I also find that being a guest on podcasts can be great for not just social proof, but it often helps people in their sales process and sales cycles
Completely.
as well. So I think the statistic is, most B2B buyers are doing 90% of their research before they even talk to somebody in the sales department, or, especially if you're doing founder sales, this is going to be even more potent, is that when someone Googles your name, they are going to be able to go and they Google your name, and what pops up? You on a bunch of podcasts talking probably about something related to the thing that they're thinking about buying from you. So what we see all the time from people is once they start going on a lot of podcasts and those episodes actually start to release, that their sales cycles will decrease in length. Because there's no longer this like, okay, well, let me think about it. I want to go and I want to do my research about you online. I couldn't find anything about you, but they Google your name, they Google the company name, and they don't actually even need to hear the episode. And that's the interesting thing, is you can have a lot of traction going on podcasts that have low to even no listenership, because once people start Googling your name and this pops up, it's, this person vouched for you, this person vouched for you, this person vouched for you. And that's what a host is doing by having you on, is they're vouching for you, essentially.
Yeah, I would call that transferring credibility, right? So they have a certain amount of credibility they've built as a host with other guests that they've transferred from those people, and they're transferring to you. I like to think of this in a way that, like, service businesses, like your typical like pest control or plumbing or home repair type of things, right? If you want to repair a pipe or something like that, and you're looking for a good plumber, well, you're probably going to get on a group chat that you already have with friends on text and say, hey, do you guys know anybody? We just had this happen. I want to call somebody that we know. Who have you guys used? And in come the responses. You might also get on Google, and look at reviews. If you don't get anything good from your friends, because sometimes they let you down. And you're looking. That's sort of your modality. When you're talking about like the professional level sales, services or products, you potentially could, as a founder, you may go to other connected people in your network that maybe you happen to be at an event and it's in line with the solution you're looking for. So you're asking people, you may fire off a couple emails to people you trust and you're connected with, that kind of thing. But where you're probably going to go 85% of the time is to podcast, YouTube, and then the web, now it's turning into ChatGPT, where you're looking for answers to your specific questions as it leads to a solution. And that's that whole buyer's journey of defining the problem, defining the solution, defining the solution provider. So podcasts have just, and I'd love to find a stat, or chart here somewhere, but podcasts have just skyrocketed in terms of their weight in that buyer's journey decision-making process. So you're 1,000% correct. And I would say on a practical level, when a guest comes on a podcast, they have very little prep, and they get on and talk about something they're comfortable talking about. If it's a good host, they're going to have a very engaging conversation, and they get all that content that they can cut up and use. And I'd say the big win is the distribution on the back end. So distribution from the host side, obviously they'll be the best because they're transferring that credibility and value. But then your distribution, going back to the buyer's journey, if you take clips from what you said, if you've been thinking and been planning about what you want to talk about and you talk about it in a certain way, those clips can be plugged right into your website, right into your LinkedIn, right into all the places where your buyers are looking for that problem solution provider journey. So it can have multiple, effects or impact outside of just being in front of that micro audience, which is by itself is a big one.
Yeah, and it provides a really good opportunity for both the short form as well as the long form. So, the short form is obviously good for these bite-sized social media type of clips, right? But the long form is great for authenticity. obviously, ads, commercials, things like that, they work very well to convince people to buy things. But at the same time, we're skeptical of ads, right? They're highly
they're bought,
polished, and they're meant to serve a specific purpose.
Yeah.
Whereas if a person is drawn in by a clip they might have seen in you on social media, they can dive in a lot deeper and see, okay, how does this person really articulate their points? Do they really stand behind them? Do they have sources for it? Are they able to back themselves up? How do they speak? Really.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about it, is because, podcasts, of course, are edited to an extent, but my favorite podcasts are the ones that aren't, cut up every few seconds to get rid of the, ums and ahs and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I want it to be authentic. I want it to be I've always said, like, video is such a great medium because it allows people to sort of meet you before they meet you. Right. Like, no, right or left. I'm not going to pick, a political side, but in this last election, Donald Trump was on Joe Rogan's podcast. Okay. This is a very extreme example of what you're talking about doing, right, with your clients. But I think it makes the point clearly that he and then Vance, who's the VP, they both were on, and they sit and they're just themselves. And how do you know that? Because it got like 3 hours worth of content at some point, and there's no cuts, and you can trust it because you trust the host, and you've watched countless hours of other interesting people that have been on and have no cuts. So all that trust plays over to that guest, that they get transferred, and now you're watching them, and you can pick as whatever you want to apart in terms of their policy and their narrative or whatever, but you're getting live and direct. This is Donald Trump. This is JD Vance. This is that person. And I think that helped a lot of people go from I'm on the fence to, okay, I'll vote this way.
Yeah. I tend to shy away from using it too much as an example, like in our marketing materials and
sure,
things like that.
Course.
Just because
you don't want to start a fire.
It's so divisive, and I, don't choose a side just by mentioning it, of course. Right. But the fact that, both of them sat down there and just talked for hours at a time, agree with what they said or don't agree with what they said, they were able to sit there and speak at a topic or multiple topics at length and not have it highly edited. And that comes across as, well, like them or dislike them, they're at least authentic. And
yes. And the other side declined. So, and honestly, I don't really care politically either way. I really stay kind of neutral, but those two signals, right, say a lot, because it's just like what you're saying about ads. We're going to see an ad as bought, right? And if one side's declining and one side's showing up for 3 hours, there's a big difference there.
I do truly believe that those two appearances did lead a lot to, him winning the election in the end, just for the fact that it was a long form take of, because he's an old guy, right? There was a lot of, speculation. Is he senile? Is he able to, actually conduct himself? Is he able to, sit there and talk for 3 hours? Is he able to do anything for 3 hours?
I don't know if I could.
That served as proof. And so I think that really played a huge part in how it all unfolded in November.
I want to add one more pro to the guesting, and that is when you have a message. We talked about like this earlier with the tour. And let's say you just have this one or two things you want to say. That's great, because having your own podcast, well, that's going to be tricky because you got to have more to say than just one or two things. But going on, 20, 30, 40 podcast and saying essentially the same thing or, around the same topic is totally fine. Because again, you're going back to these micro audiences. That means even less prep. And I love the fact that in addition to that, it gets you to say what it is that you want to say over and over and over in different ways, which teaches you something about what it is that you're saying. It teaches you about the topic and the thing you're building or whatever. There's a lesson to be learned in that guesting.
Yeah. So for someone like yourself, you need to have a fairly wide variety of guests and
Hmm.
topics and everything to keep it fresh. You could
Yeah.
also use a podcast about podcasts as an example. That's fairly meta, right? But the
Yeah, it is.
podcast about podcasting needs to talk about a lot of different facets of
Yes.
podcasting. So, how to promote it, how to host it, how to,
Hmm.
I don't listen to a lot of podcasts about podcasting
I didn't even
actually,
know that
but
was a thing.
there's definitely some that exist. But
I don't think I
even
could stand that
something,
very long.
yeah, I mean, there's something for everybody. But the point is that even in a niche topic, it still needs to be varied enough if it's all going to remain on the same show.
Yeah.
But your topic can be pretty much the same, or the same handful of topics, used over and over again when you're going on a podcast tour. Because the thing is, I recorded a podcast about a very similar topic of this, the power of guest podcast. And I did this on Monday.
Awesome.
And we're already having a much different conversation than I was having on Monday, because
Yeah.
the host is asking different questions and they're
That's
looking at
awesome.
it from a different angle.
Yeah.
But I'm saying kind of the same things, but it's in a different way because of the way that I'm prompted
Yes.
is different. And every time I have the conversation, I'm able to kind of formulate my thoughts a little bit differently because I have to answer it in a slightly different way, which makes me realize some little things about my message that sort of evolve over time.
Makes you better. And it makes your service better. It makes lots of things better. And you have new analogies and new examples and that kind of thing. I wanted to ask you, do you have any examples of clients that you have put on podcast and you've either gotten feedback from the host or directly from the guest about their outcomes or their, the results of being on a podcast? Because it would be awesome to hear, an actual true to life example of, this person went on a bunch of podcasts and this is how it changed their trajectory.
For sure. I always talk about the reduction in sales cycle times and the increase in sales. We've definitely had that from a number of people. The challenge does become, though, how do you attribute that back to podcasting? So the people that have been able to implement it best are generally the types of people who have a sales process that is a little bit more automated, actually, because they're able to insert steps into the process that says, how did you find us? How did you hear about us?
Yes.
You can certainly do that manually, but with modern CRMs and things like that, a lot of times those don't really make it all the way through to the end in terms of attribution. And as I'm sure attribution in podcasting is a difficult topic in general,
it is.
Just due to the way that we consume them and then go and interact with the host or the guest afterwards. It often doesn't come back to the podcast itself.
Just as an aside, like it's sort of similar to my example of trying to find the plumbing company. Well, the plumbing company wants to know, how did you hear of us? Well, we found you through a Google search. Well, yeah, you did a Google search after my friend from the group text told me I should look you up. Well, I have to find you somewhere. So I found you on Google, right? But I really found you in the group chat, text thread. So that's where the podcasting comes in our world is people will, even like just one clip, they'll see a clip and they'll attribute that, well, he was on that podcast. They don't watch the whole thing. They get enough value from just that one clip and they're sold. They're ready to, not sold on the product, but they're sold on moving to the next step. It's super hard to attribute, but I think that there are signals, there are markers along the way that you can look at and sort of connect the dots. Some people will even just straight tell you, I keep seeing all your podcasts. So I thought it was, and I saw this and this and this. I thought it was time for us to reach out.
Yeah. And we, of course, we always recommend people to, cut things up and repurpose the clips and post them to social media. And that definitely does work to help with engagement and get people interested.
Yeah.
But we've had a few customers who went a step beyond and started using those repurposed clips as actual ads. So running ads on Facebook, running ads on Instagram, running ads on LinkedIn. And I think that works really well, because video ads can perform incredibly well. But just like we were talking about earlier, ads are inherently a little bit, people are skeptical of them because they are ads. Whereas, there is a difference between if I just, turn around to make a video in my office, it's just me talking to the camera and that's it. It's, I maybe had a script. I did this intentionally. Whereas this is, well, if I'm on a podcast, it's, again, me being platformed by the host, somebody who actually sees value in my message and somebody who's willing to have me on their show. It just is seen as a lot more organic, which is kind of a little bit of a contradiction, real. An organic ad. But it's, a more organically produced ad, compared to a lot of what's out there. So sort of like fumbling my words here, user-generated content ads perform very well because people believe in it a little bit more because it's actually the users who are making it. This is somewhere in the middle of that. It's, I might be from the company, I might own the company, but it's not just me in my office trying to make an ad. It's me talking with somebody else and then using that as footage and using that as source material for ads.
Yeah. But, and then maybe back to our sort of our AI conversation, like us as humans we're like, historical AI beings, right? Like we are the original AIs. And so when we see in our feed a UGC ad, it might catch us by surprise the first time and we dwell on it a little longer. But after you see that same one 3 times, it's clicked, right? We know what this is. It's an ad, and it may look a little bit more organic, but it's an ad. And I think that it can go both ways, right? Something that's totally produced, like a Subaru commercial, but has a lot of intention behind it and it connects, can work. A lot of other commercials don't. UGC ads can work and they don't. But I think to your point, so, your clients taking their guesting episodes, cutting them up, it's real. Like they didn't have a script. They didn't try to say this on purpose for this potential CTA. They're doing this and just putting it out there. So the fact that they're taking it and putting it into ads is awesome, because testing that, they're going to find something that works.
For sure. And there's so many different ways for them to continue to create, more ads out of all the different podcast episodes, right? And it's also just easier to create. How many takes are you going to do if you're going to sit there and actually try to create your ad, right?
Yeah.
Like, I've done it in the past trying to create, promotional videos for the company, or even just like something for a landing page or something. And I end up doing so many takes because it's never just quite good enough, right? Yeah. This is one long take.
That's
and
right.
There's so many, pieces of content that we can pull out of it. Yep. And even if there's an error in it, I fumbled over my words about a minute ago or so, but it's fine because people expect that out of this sort of.
Yeah, it shows you're real. AIs don't fumble, right? They glitch.
they hallucinate, but they don't fumble.
Yeah, no, actually, that's a very similar way that we, when we work with our clients creating newsletters or blog posts or other types of content that support the podcast, we like talking about vision and mission and messaging and that kind of stuff. We literally just hit record on Zoom and we have a conversation. So it's like we're having a mini podcast. We're just recording it, and then we take that and we'll notate stuff right, live that, oh, you said this thing, let's say it exactly that way because it just naturally came out. Or we'll throw it through AI and it will summarize and give us what we kind of missed. So that speaks directly to what you're saying. I think you're spot on. The authenticity there is what people are looking for, and the fact that your clients are using that for ads is awesome, because they're going to find a winner.
Yeah, and it's interesting because people will often over prepare for a podcast episode. Yeah. I think it's good to have an outline of things. I find that there's 3 kind of ways that people do it. One is just kind of wing it, which I'm happy to do myself personally.
It can work
because it can work. Usually you're talking about a topic that you're an expert at already. So I'm fine to do something like that, but not everybody is. The way that I think is best is to have kind of an idea of what you're going to talk about, as well as like just a sense of, here's how the conversation is going to go, but then just allow the conversation to go in whatever direction it's going to go. Yeah. And then I think the worst way is to really plan it out. Like, here's what we're going to talk about in this order. And I find that, sometimes people will try to create like sound bites in advance, or they'll try to write down like full sentences of what they want to say. And it always comes out bad. Yeah. And it ends up sounding like a robot. But if you think about how you speak compared to how you write, most people don't speak and write in the same way, almost at all. So when we speak, we actually have trouble articulating ourselves in a concise manner. And that comes off as actually authentic. Whereas if you're going to write something, you'll write 1 or 2 sentences, and all the points that you need to hit are likely to be contained in those 1 to 2 sentences, right? Yeah. Which it actually is difficult to expand upon from there. So if I know what question you're going to ask me and I've written down the answer in advance, I'm not going to write out a whole paragraph. I'm going to write out, everything in 1, 2 sentences, and then I'm going to be stuck wondering what to say next. And I've covered everything already. And that doesn't make for good conversation. It doesn't make for good listening. But some people just have that sense of like, I need to be fully prepared. I need to know exactly what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I mean, I get it.
Preparation
But
is good.
usually after doing a few episodes, they find that, okay, this is actually not the best use of my time. I'm not actually coming across as my genuine self when I do that. And then people tend to fall more into the middle of things and, have an outline, like I say, have bullet points. Don't write full sentences when you're preparing for a podcast.
I'm a big believer of bullet points because it directs the conversation. I always like to have that up while I'm talking to my guest. Have a good framework. We're both on the same page. It's aligned and we're rocking and rolling. And hopefully there's a good vibe. There's a rhythm that we can get in where, I know enough about the topic to draw out the expertise. But yeah, over preparation, that's so boring. I mean, what's the point? Just read a book, right? I mean, exactly. I don't want that. You want the real juice of what this person is and their approach to the thing. Because someone can get on and talk about using AI for X, and the next person can get on, and you can watch both of those, same topic, basically the same points that are being made, and believe and be attracted to one over the other just because of all these other nuances, personality, tone, whatever, over preparation. So that's probably another pro for guests. I mean, if you're going out there and you there's a lot of other people out there talking about the same thing, well, go out and talk about it in a different way. How are you unique? I mean, that helps you work on your brand and your messaging and all the stuff. I mean, the more, if you have 5-10 conversations about it, you're gonna revise your thinking and your uniquenesses the more you talk about it.
It is a pro, definitely, as a guest, because if you brought on two people who are somewhat similar and they ended up having very similar conversations with you, you're going to end up going, I already published this already. Yes. Whereas I've never once thought, I had that conversation already on a different show. I shouldn't let this get out there.
Yeah. I mean, I have it all the time where I have to think, okay, what I'm reading about this person, am I interested in it? And have I already had, 2-3 people on that talk about this topic? How are they different? So that if someone listens to all 4 episodes, are they going to get something new and different out of this one? Right. So that's why I have to be very choosy and, have a hard filter on who I'm talking about what. But sometimes it's good to have similar people on about the same topic because you're able to go deeper on certain area that you couldn't with another one. So yeah, I mean, that's totally the way I think.
Mm-hmm. I agree 100%.
I love it. This has been awesome. There's a lot here. And I think that if you are on the fence about guesting, you should get off the fence and you should start guesting because there's a lot of benefit.
Yeah. A lot of people get worried about the amount of time that it might take. They're busy running the business. Yeah. They're busy trying to do marketing. And I often recommend for especially founders to have a little bit of a mindset shift in that going on shows, going on other podcasts, talking about the things that you're an expert at already is some of the most high value marketing that you can do for the company. So, even founders who are, not involved in actually the running of the marketing campaigns, they're often still involved in the high level marketing, whether that be the strategy or, the types of things that only they can do. And oftentimes this is the sort of thing that only the founder can do, which is go out and put the company in the best light that they can. And so to be able to have that mindset shift of it actually is very important work that they're doing.
Yes.
So taking an hour away from the important things, the important tasks that they have in the day to day to be able to focus in on something like this, I think is just the sort of mindset shift that allows them to give themselves permission to be able to go and spend the time doing something like this.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. And once they do a few, they start to get the, they see the roadmap there. Dana, this is awesome. We want to send people your way. So where do we send them?
So I always like to end the podcast that I do by helping people a little bit. Okay. So I always recommend people to do this as well if they go on a podcast rather than just directing people to your social media or your homepage or something like that.
A call to action.
So less of a call to action. I mean, it is a call to action at the end of the day. But I always like to provide people with a bit of a guide for being a great podcast guest and using it to help do your tour. So I always provide a free resource to people and I always tailor it to the show that I'm going on so that they can find it easily. So I have it hosted at legendarypodcast.com/exploring-growth. And if you go there, you'll be able to get access to our free podcast guesting guide that will help you to find the right shows, reach out to them, have the right equipment, and how to prep for the show that you're going to be on.
That's awesome. I didn't know you were going to do that. I just looked it up. It looks amazing. Yeah, that's cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. So there's a video there, and you can request the guide. That's awesome. Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was good. We'll have to have you back down the road.
I'd be happy to.